Hi, everyone. Thanks for attending our breakout session this afternoon. I'm Kate Otto, and like Jason said, we have
Taylor Ralph
and Claire Dinkelman.
And we work at Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Today, we're going to present how we incorporated reflective practice into our library instruction, as well as into our assessment to create growth and improvement individually and institutionally. Yes, Claire, go on, sorry.
No, yeah, so like Kate said, we're at Marquette University, which is in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And so this is our university's land and water acknowledgement. So we acknowledge in Milwaukee that we are on traditional Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee homelands and on the southwest shores of Michigamme, North America's largest system of freshwater lakes, where the Milwaukee, Menominee, and Kinnickinnick rivers meet, and the people of Wisconsin Sovereign, Anishinaabe, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Oneida, and Mohican nations remain present.
Thank you. Today, just a brief overview of what our session will look like. We're going to include the assessment of practice barriers and challenges, as well as the successes and failures we experienced as we developed and evolved our instruction over the last 2 years using reflection. The session will have interactive elements to foster our own reflection and sharing, as well as time at the end for questions and discussion, because we want to share our knowledge and experiences, but also hear and learn from you. And I'm going to let Claire take it back.
Okay. So our first thing that we have is just a quick icebreaker activity. And so we have the link up here on the slide. And then I believe it's also in the chat. And so I'll leave this up for just a couple more seconds, and then I'll switch over to this research guide. So this is a research guide that we have. So the first questions is just, your name, your institution, something about you. And then we have a question like, how often are you participating in reflection or assessment? So that just kind of gives us a good guide of where you're at. I've used this for other conferences I've been at, and it's kind of a nice format. I'm using a tool that we already have and use. And then I just have the Padlet in there for people to add their own information. So I'm actually going to click to that now. And in theory, it should open, which it did in all the tests. So, okay. So this is one of our research guides. So here at the top, we just have the icebreaker. I also like using this for conferences because it's kind of nice to show how you could potentially use it in an instruction session. We use it for this, but there's lots of different ways that you could use it. And if this is too small of a screen, you can actually click on, I believe that there's like a little button here where you can open in new. It'll take you to the Padlet, and it's a little bit bigger. Somebody said embedded is cool. It is. I actually had an instructional designer teach me how to do that. And so I just copy his box and then put my own embed code in. So yeah, this is great. A lot of people are putting stuff in, interested in learning more. Reflective passes, relation to instruction. Yeah, definitely. So cool. Yeah. Okay. And I like this, the Padlet's just kind of like a fun way to use this. I actually learned about Padlet in one of my graduate classes with, I believe, someone who's actually in this session. All right, so at this point, we're going to move to the next part of our slides, and Taylor is going to take over at this point.
Great, thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm going to talk about some assessment techniques, and especially those that are rooted in self-reflection. So self-reflection, it's looking internally and mindfully about an event, procedure, motivation, or anything that you want to assess. So it's really a low barrier, simple way to dip your toes into assessment practice. And it's also a necessary step in transitioning from an individual assessment to a larger assessment project, whether that's in the department or in the library, because what we're really doing is practicing how to incorporate these reflective concepts. So as I was looking more into self-reflection, I learned about this really interesting model. It's called the Schuen's model of reflection. And I definitely had to Google how to pronounce a name with an umlaut in it. So I think I did pretty well. But so the model states that reflection occurs either during or after an event. So there's reflection in action and reflection on action. And both of these types of reflection have different scopes. And another side note, when we're thinking about self-reflection, we're not necessarily looking at ourselves and saying, well, I think I did really bad at this, or I think I did really well at this. Really what we're doing is looking at our larger goals, maybe for an information literacy session or for an outreach event, and assessing how that's going and what needs to be changed. So for example, maybe you're teaching an information literacy session, you have all of your learning outcomes defined, your activities, you have a whole outline, and things are going very well. Until you notice that maybe from a result of an activity or student questions, you realize that students aren't necessarily grasping a key concept that they really need to understand in order for you to complete or to get to those learning objectives that you had for the session. So the reflection in action part of that would be recognizing that, hey, I'm not going to be able to necessarily meet these goals without spending more time on this concept and changing my plan to accommodate that. So maybe instead of doing another activity or having more time for discussion at the end, you're going to devote more time to really drilling in that concept and maybe doing a demonstration that'll help them better understand. The reflection on action part would then be looking back on that session and recognizing, oh, I had to change how I did things. So maybe in my future information literacy sessions, I want to incorporate an extra activity that demonstrates this concept. Maybe I want to work with the faculty member to create a follow-up project or even experiment with a type of a flipped classroom approach, which can sometimes also be a great way to instill these concepts that we definitely know that we want these students to grasp. So there are a few elements of successful self-reflection: openness, observation, objectivity, openness, even the fact that you're here today and you're willing to learn about assessment practice and you're thinking about incorporating this into your daily workflows is a really big step. Sometimes with these self-reflection techniques, it asks you to be vulnerable, and sometimes that's really hard, especially if you're not used to doing that. Observation is just contextualizing for yourself why you're engaging in self-reflection and kind of justifying yourself as to why this is worthwhile. So I know that all of us are very busy people. We have set workflows. Sometimes when we're working on something, especially if we have like a really busy week with a ton of instruction sections, we might not think that we have enough time, but recognizing that this is a worthwhile practice, which will ultimately lead to us improving our end goals, is just a really great recognition and reassurance that what we're doing is going to eventually lead to something really positive. And then objectivity, so taking a step back and having an outside perspective when we're looking at the things we're assessing. So I know we can become really entrenched as our workflows for librarians, like we've been doing this forever and it's been working for us, so why fix it? When really this could turn on blinders to improvement or success. So keeping in mind that, hey, if someone else was coming into the situation and seeing how we were doing things, what changes would they suggest for us? Next slide, please. And here I just have some examples of self-reflection. Again, these are pretty easy, simple things that you can incorporate into your daily workflow. So some of these you might be familiar with, like journaling, which would be talking about your feelings, reflecting on what went well, what didn't well, doing some of that reflection on action process. Of course, all of these do have pros and cons as well, which we've included in this kind of matrix. Some of these things are going to take pre-planning, like creating a rubric or an evaluation form. So this is something that we've used to evaluate our own instruction. So even before the session starts, we've identified things that we want to focus on, areas improvement, or our end goals. And then afterward, we can go through and reflect more specifically on how those things were accomplished. So it creates a kind of a roadmap, really, of what we want to focus on. Tracking your feelings, I actually learned this from a mental health advocate, and it's just the process of, so after you do an event, information lit session, outreach session, whatever, kind of color coding how you feel about that. So that's getting more in touch with your feelings, but can also help identify patterns and perceptions that may need to be changed. So if you're always finding that you are feeling negatively after an outreach event that involves other librarians, we can notice that, hey, maybe something, we might need to try something different and change our approach to how we're doing this. And then peer observation. So we are going to talk more about this a little bit later in the presentation with Claire. And this is one of our major projects that we've done within our department, specifically focused on instruction. So though this isn't necessarily like a self-reflection because you are doing this with other people, sometimes those outside conversations can give us more insight into our own feelings and perceptions and can help us contextualize things and also feel more confident. So I think we're going to go back to that LibGuide and back to that Padlet so we can ask you a few questions. And I will link that back in the chat for you. I know sometimes it's hard to like click through these slides. And we're going to ask the question, what practices do you engage in, if any? I noticed in the icebreaker, some of you are still kind of exploring this area, but it could be one of the things that I mentioned or something that works really well for you. And then in there, we also have a really quick poll that asks, do you regularly engage with reflective practice or assessment? So if you could answer that as well, that would be really helpful too. And I see that Maria has a really good point. So the peer observation to be helpful, but it gets tricky when peer observation is a formal part of the evaluation. So that's something that we haven't quite gotten to within our department. So like Claire will talk about, this really started as a group with people who are just individually interested in assessment. And it kind of grew from there. And this peer observation was one of the methods we chose to advance our goals related to instruction for that group. But I could see how, hey, if assessment is going to be part of your evaluation and you have to make sure that you have these elements and this is something that you'll be, I mean, not graded on, but assessed with your supervisor. Yeah, that would definitely be an interesting consideration. I'd be interested to see if other people have experience with that.
Yeah, and somebody said that they have like the post-lesson reflection set of questions that they journal, and I'm the same way. After my sessions, I always think like, okay, what went well, what didn't go well, and what I always find is that it's really helpful for classes that I don't necessarily teach every semester, and I totally forgot about the things that didn't go well until I like look back on my notes, and I was like, oh that didn't work. And then kind of spending some time thinking about how I'm going to modify that for this next time. So I found that to be really helpful to make me feel more confident about the next time I'm teaching that class. Creating cool down notes. Yeah, I haven't heard someone call it that before, but I like that. And then asking students what they've learned. I do that too. I ask them, what's one thing that you learned? What's one question that you still have? And so particularly for classes like English 1, where I'm asking like, what's a question you still have? If I'm seeing the same question kind of pop up across sessions, I'm like, okay, I need to kind of think about how I talk about that concept, or I need to add in something more. So, and so yes, so this link, I will keep this this research guide up. And so definitely feel free to come back to this later to kind of review what people have written. Spreadsheet and outline. Oh, wow. That's going like, I usually just take notes like in the Microsoft Notes, but maybe I need to like up my game and put it in Excel. Yeah, so someone said like what I need to work on is actual assessment of students. And so that's a really great point to make and something that we're still working on too. Okay, so just because I want to make sure we stay on time and get to everything, I'm going to go back to the slides, but definitely feel free to stay in that LibGuide, keep writing ideas, keep reviewing what other people are writing. So, so the title of the presentation is Individual to Institution. So how do we kind of make that work? And so this is, how do you move from that, doing this individually to kind of creating what we're doing at a larger level? So among us, there were a few of us, we knew that we were interested in looking more closely at assessment projects. So we formed a working group. So it's not an official committee within the library. It doesn't need to have a charge or bylaws. And so it was just kind of a really nice informal structure. And then at first it was just our research and instruction department, but eventually we offered the opportunity for any department to join. And so now technical services, we have people from that department as well. So it's been a great opportunity for us to discuss projects across the work that we do. It feels sometimes like we're in silos, but we're actually interested in a lot of the same research areas. So one of our first major projects that we did was Coffee with Librarians. We invited faculty who had us in their classrooms to discuss what went well, what could go better. And so we got a lot of great feedback that we weren't really anticipating. They talked to us about communication with the library. They talked about their concerns with student selection of research materials. And so our other big project we did was peer observation. So we have really great peers at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee who created their own peer observation program and very kindly shared their materials with us. And so we kind of repurposed that for us and we started that project. And so that's where we volunteer to observe each other's instruction sessions. So we meet before, we have a rubric that we go over. The observed librarian says, I want you to kind of focus on this part of my class. So maybe it's the activities, maybe it's the words that you're using. And then they meet afterwards to debrief. And so then I have like a sheet of all their notes during the class. It's really great. So Kate's going to talk more about the successes from that program. And then we also have a link in the research guide to a Google folder that has the materials from both of these programs. So part of this great cross-department collaboration is that we're moving beyond instruction projects into collections. So Taylor and our metadata librarian are sifting through mounds of data right now to determine how we could assess our collection for diversity. So looking at gender, race, nationality, among various data points. So, and then we do have to admit that it's not all sunshine and rainbows. There's obviously barriers and challenges to address. For us, it's certainly time to do the individual assessment itself. But then also to form this working group, it's one more meeting on our calendar, plus programming requires planning and time. And then along with that, we just have a lot of other things on our plate. So we're all at a point in our career where we're more willing to say yes than no. And I think we're trying to find that balance between picking projects that we're really passionate about. So we have monthly meetings and we try to stay on track, but it's not always easy. Administration can be hard, buy-in can be hard if assessment isn't part of your current culture. So starting a working group and not an official committee was a great option. If there's red tape to start new initiatives. We also got a lot of admin buy-in because we didn't ask for a lot. There was a small fund needed for the Coffee with Librarians, but the peer observation part was completely free. So I think that we do have like a Padlet for the barriers and challenges, but I really want to make sure that we get to the end part of our presentation. So we're actually just going to move right to successes and futures, and we can talk about barriers and challenges in our wrap-up Padlet.
So for successes and future ideas, I'm speaking for all three of us when I say individually we learned and grew a lot from the practice, assessment, and reflection that we underwent individually and together as a smaller working group. We grew as we shared ideas and reflected on what was important for us and our growth and our vision as library instructors. From the individual transformative growth that we gained, we also grew collaboratively as instructors and gained confidence through our efforts like the peer observation that Claire talked about, Coffee with Librarians, and group reflection. I think we became more familiar with faculty needs, more comfortable seeking out and understanding how to gain feedback from them in different ways, and also for how to, we gain more confidence in advocating for ourselves as information literacy experts to other faculty, as well as staff and students on campus. And we gained more confidence why that expertise matters and how we could kind of advocate and speak to that more. Beyond our group, the major projects we implemented over the last 2 years were met often with enthusiasm and constructive feedback as well from our peers and from library leadership. A major success was our impact on department-wide efforts to create standardized learning objectives for information literacy sessions. And we became library leaders for assessment as our working group expanded to include other departments, individuals from other departments once they kind of heard and gained interest from our efforts. And as we continually tried to communicate and be transparent with our efforts. So we were constantly throughout the last year or two talking about what we were doing in pretty much every opportunity that we had, whether it was a department meeting or a larger library meeting. So moving from the individual experience and our small working group experience, we've also been able to incorporate these practices beyond our working group to positively impact our departments, the library, and campus at large. Currently, our department is growing a culture of assessment through initiatives such as creating shared learning objectives. And in the future, we will be curriculum mapping and rewriting our strategic plan to align with the greater library's vision, as well as the institution's vision and strategic plan. So the data that we gather from what we've done, what we're building, and what we plan on doing within different initiatives in the library and with campus, we'll use that data then also, and those connections that we make with faculty and other departments on campus to integrate more into changes and evolution within our strategic vision, as well as the campuses to align with the campus's strategic vision. Additionally, our work together has fostered more engagement with other campus departments, including multiple student services such as partnerships with the residence halls and the Wellness Center to further embed our efforts on campus when relevant to better serve students and our campus community. So with the remaining little under 15 minutes, we're going to go back to our research guide for a wrap-up discussion, where we have just a couple of questions where we would like to foster just a greater understanding of what you've done, what you've gotten out of assessment and reflective practices, what other thoughts you might want to share with the group. As you are inputting things in your comments into the research guide, we're also going to feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to ask a question, share your thoughts out loud, or start a discussion with all the attendees.
Yes, we definitely recognize we're not like the reflection assessment experts. We've learned so much from other people, and we love hearing from other people on this.
Yes, so let's go ahead and any questions you might have, go ahead and you can ask them or pop them in the chat box if you're uncomfortable with that. And I believe you guys have something going on in your research guide too.
Yeah, at the very bottom we have the so there is a barriers and challenges one if people wanted to post anything to that one, like if there's something that we didn't talk about, but then also we have this like session closing discussion one where we have various questions that people can answer, or you can come off mic and you can share with us. So, and I definitely included that assessment reflection can be difficult. So what motivates you to keep going? And so I think, you know, like Kate mentioned, the peer observation, we had to be very vulnerable, which was really scary at first. But it was really great because I feel like I learned a lot about myself. And so I felt a lot better than the next time I went into a classroom, because there were things I didn't even notice that someone's like, well, I really like how you did that. And I was like, oh, I didn't even think about that. I was just looking for the negatives, and they found a lot of positives.
Yeah, I think in every experience that I also had, there was a much greater focus on the positives. And as we came together within the group, we were able to talk more about what in general could be worked on. The whole point and what we went into it with, and we were lucky, we've had a really great group that's extremely supportive and encouraging. But the point was to, you know, help develop ourselves professionally with our skill set and build each other up. So when you reframe the whole process into wanting to build each other up and doing that very genuinely, positive things happen, much like in other aspects of life.
So someone said the challenges and barriers Padlet was locked. Is the closing discussion one also locked, or people haven't?
Yeah.
Because let me.
Well, it is for me. But while you're figuring that out, Claire, I can also add a point that I could have mentioned during my portion of the presentation as well. And this is really fresh in my mind because I just moved to a new department this last year. I now work in the technical services department instead of the research and instruction department where Kate and Claire work. And this might be familiar to a lot of people in this session, but for us, our library is a little bit siloed. There's not a lot of communication between departments, and this assessment working group in particular was a really great way to kind of break down those barriers and also help advance some like really critical issues that we're discussing for libraries. So for example, when I was in research and instruction, I taught every semester I would teach a class with a history professor who focused on Indigenous studies. So we would have to have that talk about subject headings, you know, Indians of North America, how that might be problematic, how that might not reflect our current thinking. But I didn't think that this was an issue that could potentially be fixed. And then when I went over to the technical services department, I could talk to the metadata librarian, and she was like, hey, we can fix this. But we didn't know that it was an issue. So when we were going back and talking about the types of assessment projects that we wanted to engage in, if on one side we're saying, hey, this is an issue for us, and then the other side saying, hey, this is something we can fix, and vice versa, is something that has really been kind of an unexpected benefit of this assessment working group. So we are also looking at collection diversity. So we've kind of expanded from just looking at information literacy and outreach efforts to include other parts of the library that still, of course, impact our students and our users as well.
I checked the challenges and barriers one, and there isn't anything that like it should be open. I don't know what's going on. But I guess we can do this. Challenges and barriers.
Mm-hmm. And we have a comment in the chat. One advantage to having virtual live classes this year is that I had recordings of myself to watch. This is Lindsay. Definitely hard to watch sometimes. I've had that too, but it helped me so much at the beginning of the fall semester to hear what I was doing and what I needed to change. Absolutely, it's extremely difficult to be vulnerable or to listen or watch yourself via recording.
Very brave.
Yeah, that is a level that I'm like, oh, I don't know about that, but maybe I'll do it now. Maybe now I have like the push to do it.
Yeah,
so.
And whether it's pure observation or watching recordings or asking students through a Qualtrics or a Google form, questions or faculty for feedback, we do also acknowledge that different things work for different people, and that if something doesn't work out right the first time, if you try a different, reflective practice or assessment method, it's worth kind of pursuing and dabbling to find the right fit.
Definitely. Like I've like watched so many other librarians do their sessions, and I pick up little pieces here and there. Like I shadowed a librarian and she was doing a whole section on like theater arts, and I was like, I'm in health sciences. That's totally different. But she had this great activity at the beginning of the session. And I was like, oh, I like see ways I could modify that for my own sections. And now I regularly include an icebreaker in my sessions, and I take the time for that. And it's because I saw how successful it was in another class. So someone said staffing, that for challenges and barriers. Yeah, that's a huge one. Again, like the whole time piece, and that you have to kind of figure out what's like the right level that's going to work depending on what you have that time for. So I definitely know. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. No, you go on, Claire.
No, go ahead.
Well, it looks like you wear several different hats, just the cataloging and working with students and systems work in addition to instruction. So like you said, there are pros and cons to being embedded in that many areas and seeing kind of more of a holistic way that the library is working with the wider campus. But it offers a lot less time to be able to kind of initiate a lot of assessment. Reflective practices are nice, especially even if you were just to kind of journal or write things down right after a session. I found even using like your own personal Google form or Qualtrics then creates this timeline where you can just put one sentence after like an instruction session of how it went or what you need to remember in the future. And then over time, I've been able just to see my little sentence blips after each session, and if any trends or like evolution has happened.
The hardest part is finding the time. It really is.
I watched one of my presentations, and I had no idea I talked so much with my hands. Has ever noticed, even in a small screen, so trying to keep my hands down sometimes. And at least
I noticed that too. Yeah, so I've been holding a pen like below my screen. That's been really helpful for me.
Yeah. I noticed one of the comments talking about wrapping up an annual performance review, creating an individual development plan for the year for self-assessment. I think that's great. And kind of building off of that, one thing that I found helpful is oftentimes, even as I've been speaking now, I say great, or that was really good, or that's awesome. But trying to transition from using kind of those judgment words to saying very kind of specific things like this specific task helped students do this in an increased or a better way. So trying to, when I write that one sentence that I was talking about before, just making sure that I'm extremely specific in whether there was an improvement or whether something kind of regressed and I know that I need to address.
And then someone else wrote, I find that reflection helps me avoid burnout. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting comment to make, because I do think that that definitely, sometimes I look at having that record to go back to of what happened and how I felt about it is really helpful for when I am doing that future lesson planning and I don't feel completely overwhelmed. And burnout is a very real thing that happens in this profession, especially if you look at the person who said staffing and they do all of it. And so we're constantly being asked to do more with less. And any way we can make it easier for ourselves.
Yeah, any way that we can personalize things. Like, I don't think there's any problem with, of course, we're doing things for the institution, but we also want to do things for ourselves, even though if it's work, and of course we have our separate lives, but being able to make time for yourself, because it really is in the pursuit of something greater that'll eventually help your work life, is a really interesting, that's a really interesting way to look at it. So I appreciate that comment.
Yeah, I don't think I would have thought about it quite that way, but I do think that is, I think that's definitely probably part of my thought process. So
I think also, especially over the last year, given the pandemic, I've had a lot of time to self-reflect, but being able to reflect together as a small group was a lifesaver. Just especially getting out of like your bubble. I'd say the group reflection really helped, especially because we intentionally and genuinely, both are important, the intention and being genuine in being positive to each other. Maybe we shared something or we're vulnerable about something that wasn't going great for us in an instruction session, or switching to synchronous and asynchronous learning virtually. But the fact that we were building each other up and being positive while also providing feedback, constructive feedback, that helped me personally to avoid a lot of the burnout that I had been experiencing for different parts of the year.
yeah, I think that we got very, very lucky, and that we have like a good group of people who are interested in this and want to do the work. So, I mean, that's a huge part of it too, is that, having even that small group to start with is huge.
Yeah. And even if you're thinking about one of the barriers and challenges might be you have a very kind of a group with a lot of personalities, and you think maybe it might be challenging to kind of get that started. Practice makes perfect, and just creating those little small groups and really intentionally working at it, I think still has a lot of value, because you're creating these build up conversations that then kind of form the culture that you want. So making sure that you kind of put effort into those relationships in the community that you're building within your workplace.
Great.
So we are at time, I think.
Yeah. So if we don't have any more questions, I want us to go ahead and give us a round of applause here for Claire, Taylor, and Kate. Thank you very much. This is a very insightful kind of discussion here on reflecting on our practices. And I appreciate your presentation. Thank you very much. I thought I saw a question.
Well, thank you to everyone who attended. We really appreciate it. We know it's hard at the end of the day during these multi-day conferences.
Yeah. Well, it's only 2, right? So we've got the whole day ahead of us, at least to hear. So again, let us thank Taylor, Claire, and Kate for the presentation. I appreciate it. And thank you all for coming. That will conclude our summit for today. We'll see everybody in the morning, bright and early, 9 a.m. Central Time, for our
All right,
second-
thanks everyone.
Thank you.